Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be ranking all 83 brawlers in the game right now, from the very worst all the way up to the very best. We're of course going to be putting these in a tier list, starting off with the F tier and working our way up to the S tier. So the balance changes have had an impact on the meta for about a week now, so we've consolidated this, played a bunch of ranked, taken a look at a bunch of scrims and everything else, and this is what I've kind of came to. Of course, do be aware that the meta still is changing a lot, and still we're not really yet to see any pro tournament gameplay. So let's start off at the F tier, and of course starting off with the worst brawler in the game, Doug. Do I even need to explain Doug? Doug is Doug. He doesn't do anything, doesn't provide any value. He's just Doug. Next up in the F tier, we have Hank. Unfortunately, I think Hank has dropped off a little bit. I think all of the top meta brawlers just absolutely rip through Hank. He's just a big meat shield at the moment. I don't really see much use case for him, unfortunately, so I think the F tier is where he's at. Next up in the F tier, we have Maisie. So I just don't really like Maisie whatsoever in this meta. There's so many tank counters with hypercharges, which are just way more reliable than Maisie. And a lot of times you just have to open your eyes to just juke her main attack. It takes her so long to even charge to her super now. So I think she's pretty unusable. Lastly, in the F tier, we have Ash. He received a buff to his Rotten Banana gadget, but I didn't really do anything. Too many hypercharged brawlers in the game that just destroy him, and he's yet to really see any buffs to any of his base stats. So now moving on to the D tier, starting off with Bonnie. She's really fallen from grace even since they buffed her supercharged gear, so she only needed 3 hits to get super. She's just too risky to use. Even when you jump in on people, you don't even guarantee you get a kill anymore because of hypercharges. She's easy to trade out, and she's just not worth it. Next to the D tier, we have Mr. P, and he just gets overwhelmed so easily with so many aggressive options like Frank, Daryl. There's just so much running into him, he can't keep up. Next up, we have a Penny, and she's just still pretty bad in the meta. She received a buff to her turret, but she's probably waiting for a hypercharge because she just doesn't have the DPS to keep up with the meta. But if they buff the damage again, she could become too strong again. Next up with D tier, we have Janet. So again, a big problem here is that she doesn't have the DPS to keep up with the meta. There are some underrated use cases for her, though. Still on those grassy maps, she can be good as a late pick, but still far often she's just outclassed. Next to the D tier, we have a Bo. So again, another brawler that has fallen off. He once was able to deal insane damage, since nerfed, and his mechanics overall are just a little bit outdated in this meta, so D tier is fair. Next up, we have a Bull. So the only use case for him is inside of Heist. Sometimes he can be good if you're looking to counter like Chuck, etc. His hypercharge completely carries him because his kit everywhere else is just terrible. Next up, we have Squeak. So he recently got a hypercharge. I thought the hypercharge super was going to be pretty decent. 2 Squeak supers, I thought that would do a lot, but literally the second Squeak super, it just goes to Narnia. It's nowhere to be seen. Squeak is so outclassed in its meta. He's not very good. Next up in the D tier, we have Sam. So Sam, a good Sam player can easily be like C tier, but I still feel like if you just go in blind into ladder, you're going to get just manhandled most of the time because there's just so many tank counters in this meta. He's just a free supercharge for that. Next up in the D tier, we have Miko. So he's definitely fallen down the rankings a lot. I've started to realize now that he's not even that great of a late pick option anymore. There's just too many hypercharges. His hypercharge just plain and simple sucks. And if you're thinking again of late picks, there's just better options like Mortis, Daryl, and other assassins that just outclass him too often. And then finally in the D tier, we have El Primo. So the only use case really for him is to counter the likes of Frank. Frank's not as prevalent in the meta as he used to be, so Primo's gone down as well. So now we're going to be moving on to the C tiers. So typically these brawlers are just pretty decent. You know, they're not trash, but they're not the greatest. There's normally a better option. So starting off with Fang. Fang has really dropped off. I wanted to put him in the D tier, but then I realized he can still use him sometimes. The biggest problem is that his hypercharge takes forever to charge. Against good players, you're going to get demolished. I think as well that he's just been power crept. There's just so many damage buffs around in the meta, which just end up deleting him. So he's not really the greatest. He's only okay as a late pick sometimes. So in the C tier, we have Edgar. So another brawler where his hypercharge completely carries him. He's only good as a late pick, and especially because there's a few throws in the meta, he can be good to counter the likes of Barley and Larry and Laurie, but I still feel like he is outclassed right now. Next up in the C tier, we have Charlie. So ever since the damage nerf, she just seemed to drop off quite a fair bit. She's never really seen, I don't remember the last time I saw a Charlie, but I still think she's okay. She's a good tank to shut down. Her super is still fundamentally really strong. It's just there's normally a better option, so that's why you don't see her in the meta, but in ladder you can always run a Charlie. Next up in the C tier, we have Ruff. So in terms of ladder, he's like the least picked brawler right now, but I still think Ruff's is okay. You know, he will get like ran all over by some assassins in the meta, but he's still good in pro play. There's like a few situations where he can make a Ruff's work, so it's okay. He probably does need a buff though. Next up in the C tier, we have Pam. So another brawler that just seems to have fallen off no matter where you look, so she could easily be in the D tier as well. Her only use case is Hot Zone, and I feel like she is getting crept up upon. in hot zone because there's just other brawlers that can just shut her down pretty quickly. So yeah, Pam's just a bit meh. Next, I'm going to see here we have Willow. So she received a buff to her shield while she's using her super, and that didn't really do the most to Willow. I think the main problem really is that super's just so incredibly hard to hit, but she's an okay option when the likes of Berry and Barley are banned, because you can never really go too wrong with Willow. Next, I'm going to see here we have Spike. So he received a buff to his HP, which really didn't do anything, because the big problem with Spike is that he doesn't deal with enough damage to keep up. Considering he's a damage dealer, you just rather go like Clancy, Chester, Gale, while Spike, he's still pretty squishy and not that good. So when it's here, we have a Leon. So another brawler that's just a bit meh at the moment. He's got a really good hypercharge, but the problem is it can take forever to charge it, especially against good players. They'll also know to group up pretty easily as well, but I will say there is a rare occasion where it can work, especially because he's still got a good gadget and the hypercharge. So when it's here, we have Eve. So another brawler that used to be always consistently strong, especially on maps like Canal Grande and the Open, but as time goes on, she's starting to get weaker and weaker, so I just don't really see too much point using Eve. So we have Jackie. So another brawler that's just kind of lost a few key synergies in the game. There used to be a lot of Grey Jackie, etc., but you don't really see that anymore. In terms of ladder, you can always go Jackie and Brawl because of that hypercharge, but I think as more hypercharge is being introduced, Jackie's just getting worse. Next up in the seats here, we have Ems. So another brawler I'm just finding terrible in this meta. I could easily put her in the D tier. Her hypercharge is terrible, and I just think she's such a free kill, even for tanks right now, that can just easily overwhelm her. So I don't really see too much use case for her, but I will say, like, you can go like Ems and like Gem Grab and Brawl if you're just playing ladder, because you're pretty much always going to face a tank and get some value. So in the C tier, we have Colt. So in terms of highest, he's S tier, and he can sometimes be like a good counter pick option, but after I've thought about it, there's just better, more consistent damage dealers out there. So yeah, he's already good in highest. So in the C tier, we have Chuck. So of course he's absolutely S tier in highest, but at the same time, I'm finding as months and months go on, as new hypercharges are being added, there's just even easier ways to counter Chuck, because there'll just be better DPS brawlers that can destroy the high safe quicker than he can. So I think as time goes on, he will get worse. Next up in the C tier, we have Grom. So he received 2 buffs, one to his damage and one to his supercharge rate. These both definitely did help him, but still at the same time, there's just better throwers that have hypercharges. You know, Barley, Tick, even Berry's much better. Grom can be good as a late pick though into snipers, but outside of that, he is countered too easily still. Next up in the C tier, we have Brock. So he received a buff to his hypercharge damage per rocket. I think that's helped him a little bit, but it's still Brock. I still think he's so easy to run all over. There's so many snipers that outclass him. There's so much aggression, which of course can outclass Brock, because it's so hard to hit brawlers when you're playing Brock, especially when they're in that medium distance. But yeah, I just don't really see much use case for it. Next up in the C tier, we have BB. So again, another brawler which is starting to drop off because other brawlers just getting hypercharges. You know, fundamentally, BB isn't really the greatest. The hypercharge is good. It can make some pop-off plays, especially with the bubble inside of heist like Hot Potato, but I just think there's just better brawlers out there. Next up in the C tier, we have Shelly. So I used to always go to Shelly as a tank shutdown, but when you've got Clancy and Gale in the meta and Chester that just rip through tanks so much more consistently, Shelly's not really that great anymore. Next up in the C tier, we have Poco. So he received a recent hypercharge, which I think is incredibly underwhelming. And you've got to consider as well, Poco just doesn't have the DPS to keep up with the meta. You know it's bad when I don't even see Poco being used in like Hot Zone and other scenarios like that. He might have some good synergy on ladder now when you know you can pick 2 tanks, etc. He's a little bit better there, but yeah, in competitive, he's not really used. Next up in the C tier, we have Nanny. So again, another brawler that got a hypercharge, and another brawler where it's just insanely underwhelming. This hypercharge is literally useless. So yeah, Nanny's only really going to be good on the longer range maps, but still I'm seeing in pro play that less and less pros are starting to pick Nanny. So she might even be dropping off more than we think. Next up in the C tier, we have Pearl. So I'd say Pearl's in around the B/C tier. She's just perfectly balanced. She's really good in bounty, knockout, and where you want to counter, you know, those aggro compositions, especially if the opponent has a late pick in ranked, you can go Pearl because she can rip through them, especially with the gadget and the super as well. So you always see Pearl being used in knockout to counter Kit, for example. So she's always good in the competitive meta. Next up in the C tier, we have Rosa. So another brawler you don't really see featured too often in the meta anymore. She still has some use cases on some grassy maps, but that's not really that many in the map pool right now, hence why she's not that great. Next up in the C tier, we have Buzz. So another kind of assassin that's dropped off a little bit, outclassed by some of the better ones like Daryl and other brawlers like that. Also, you just take a look at the top brawlers in the meta, Gale, Clancy, etc. They just destroy him, so there's not really many ways to make Buzz work. Next on the C tier, we have Sprout. So he recently received a damage buff, which has helped him out a little bit, but I still feel like this meta is really aggressive, especially since the recent addition to Mortis and other brawlers. He's not really the greatest, and I would still prefer to go other throwers right now in the meta. Next on the C tier, we have Lou. So if you play a lot on ladder, Lou is a great shutdown to a lot of the assassins right now. You know, the Darryls, the Mortis, Frank. You're going to feed a lot of hypercharge supers from them, but still, if you're playing him in ranked and more competitive games, it's pretty hard to cycle through to even your first super. That's the biggest drawback for him, so I think he's pretty balanced. Next on the C tier, we have Melody. So I think she really has dropped off in this meta. She doesn't have the DPS to keep up. Melody's only really good into sharpshooters, and there's not that many in the top of the meta. She's still really good in heist, and she's pretty easy to use there, but I'm not really seeing her crop up anywhere else because, again, everyone can just destroy her in a 1v1. Next on the C tier, we have Otis. So I actually start to put Otis towards the B tier, mainly because he's one of the only counters to Darryl, because other brawlers, Darryl can escape with a super. Well, if you mute Darryl, he can't roll away. Otis is also just pretty underrated anyway on grassier maps, and pretty good on like Undermine, Double Swoosh, etc. But people just don't play him because he's boring, but that doesn't mean that he's not good, so I think he's pretty good right now. Next on the C tier, we have Draco. So I'd say he's actually one of the most forgotten brawlers right now, even though he's got a busted gadget and he can get a lot of pressure. I still think there are too many tank counters at the top of the meta for him to thrive, but he can work, especially in hot zone and other cheesy strategies, but he does rely off like a healer or just something paired with him to get him going. Lastly, in the C tier, we have Griff. So he's always floating in and around the B/C tier. Let's just say he's perfectly balanced because he's a good counter option to break open the map. He's pretty good into a lot of the meta brawlers right now because he's a tank counter. So now we're going to be moving on to the B tier brawlers. So these are just a bit better than the C tier, of course. They're going to be a bit more reliable and not countered as hard in the meta. So start off with Dynamite. So I know one of the best brawlers in the game counters him so hard in Mortis, but if we're talking about ranks, he's still a really good late pick, and still if there's no Mortis in your game, you're going to be able to have a good chance with so many of the map pools really favoring throws right now. You've also got the fact that his gadget's busted, his hypercharge is still busted, so I think Dynamite will always remain in and around the balance bit. Next up in B tier, we have a Lola. So the damage buff definitely helped Lola out a lot. I think B tier might be a bit of a stretch, so maybe towards the C tier, but the damage buff is still good because she can be like a reliable mid. You can really feel it, especially when you're looking to counter brawlers like Meg, for example. But yeah, I don't know. Lola's not really like making a big impact on the meta. So in the B tier, we have Gray. So another brawler that's struggling with his lack of DPS, but we'll say he's still a bit underrated. He's got a really good gadget. His super is still so strong if you use it in hot zone. His gadget alone just counters throwers, and especially on knockout. I think people are still sleeping on Gray. He's a good brawler. So in the B tier, we have Tara. So she's gone up a couple of tiers, literally because of her hypercharge. It's really good. The problem is there's still some lane brawlers, and the map pool isn't really the most advantageous for her because you've got so many throwers that can dominate her, but still one hypercharge can really turn the game. It can destroy so much terrain, and you've also got the buffs to her star powers which are helping her, so I think B tier is pretty fair. You start to see her a lot more in the meta now. Next up in the B tier, we have Nita. So still feel like her hypercharge rate is still really good. You cycle it with 2 supers. Main reason making her B tier. I think if the map pool was better and throwers weren't as dominant, should probably be still towards the A tier, but yeah, it's holding her back a little bit. Next up in the B tier, we have Jessie. So again, another brawler that's just countered so much by the throwers in the meta. Also, I just think even into tanks, she's not really the biggest shutdown, but she's still okay. She's good in hot zone. She can be good in other scenarios, in gem grab, rubble, etc. She's just okay. Next up in the B tier, we have Crow. So he's really found his foot in the meta again ever since they reworked his hypercharge, and people have found out how strong it is in heist. He's like Esther in heist, and then he can still be pretty good on those grassier maps to scout. His hypercharge can still deal some insane damage, but I will say that most of the time you probably will find a better option. So with the B tier, we have Cordelius. So there's a lot of good hypercharges in the game right now, and Cordelius can be a great shutdown, but I believe now because of all these other damage buffs, etc., he's starting to fall down a little bit. You know, his hypercharge does take a while to cycle through, but we'll say that he's still pretty versatile, and a good Cordelius can really go to town. Next up in the B tier, we have Mandy. So the recent buff to her a couple of months ago has made her so good in knockout and bounty. If you're playing ranked, you're going to have a big success success rate with Mandy because people just don't know how to juke the super. In pro play, it's a little bit harder to make her work, but if you take a look at Olivia on the Mandy, for example, if you make it work, you will absolutely dominate and carry because, of course, that super does insane damage. So for me, I think B tier is pretty good. Next up in the B tier, we have Carl. So his damage buff, his gadget damage is actually really good in Heist as well, and just overall, he can be such a good late pick. That's the only good thing about him late on in the draft, because too early on the draft, you are going to get destroyed by those tank counters, so just be aware of that. So in the B tier, we have a Belle. So there's starting to become too many counters to her right now, so you wouldn't be shocked if she goes down to the C tier, but still at the same time, you can never really go wrong with her instead of Heist, Gem Carry, and Gem Grab. So many versatile options. If there's an open map, then you can always go a Belle. Next up in the B tier, we have B. So the damage to her charge shot went up, and it's been reverted from the nerf that she received like a year ago or so, and that's enough to put B back into the meta for me because I'm seeing her everywhere inside of ladder. She's such a great shutdown now. She does so much damage, like over 5k with the damage gear active with that big sting. So I think she's definitely back. So in the B tier, we have 8-bit. Still, his boosted booster star power is just carrying him in this meta. He can make for so many cheesy strategies. You know, in Bounty, you can just go defensive with a sniper and a thrower, and you pretty much win all of the time. You've got Heist, of course, he's insane. And then if you go on ladder, there's a lot of cheesy strategies in like Wipeout, etc., where all you needed to do is get the first few kills, and then you can just camp with this turret. It's like impossible to push into. So for all those cheesy combos, he has to stay in the B tier. Next up in the B tier, we have Tick. So he received a buff to his hypercharge rate. Although the hypercharge itself isn't the greatest, it just allows Tick to make a few more plays. So for that reason, he's still really good at knockout and Bounty. So B tier is where he's at. Next up in the B tier, we have Amber. So she's floating in and around the A/B tier. She received a big damage nerf to her Dancing Flames gadget. So now she can't really rip through tanks like she could before, but she's still fairly consistent, and you can never really go wrong with an Amber. Next up in the B tier, we have Sandy. So again, another brawler that's floating in and around the A/B tier. But the reason why I put Sandy in the B tier is because you just don't get as many hypercharges as you used to have. You also got to consider there's so many better lane options that counter Sandy right now. You've got throwers that counter Sandy. You've got the likes of Meg, Chester, Gale. All of them can just do so well into Sandy. So you're starting to see him struggle a bit. And lastly in the B tier, we have Gene. So I think he's dropped down just a little bit because of his use rate inside of Gem Grab. I don't think it's as prevalent because there's too much Mortis, Daryl, but these brawlers can get on top of you fast, and Gene hates that. So I think B tier is where he's at. So now we're going to be moving on to the A tier. So these brawlers are just some of the best in certain game modes, or just really strong across the board, and there's a lot of A tier brawlers to go through. So to start with, we have Colette. So ever since Frank and Meg have become meta, Colette's just been such a good shutdown to them. She's one of the few counters to some of the tankier options in the game. I will say she's not as great as a counter against the likes of Mortis and Daryl, but she still rips through tanks. Next up in the A tier, we have Stu. So I overrated Stu just a tiny bit in my top 10 brawler video. The health buffs did do a lot, especially the Gasser Heal Star Power got buffed as well. It's just made him more prevalent in the pro meta. I'm not seeing him too much in ranked because people just go with the dumbed down assassin hypercharges, but I think the buff did do him well. Next up in the A tier, we have RT. So another sleeper pick a lot of the time. He's such a good addition in knockout because he can counter a lot of the cheesy strategies, and especially the late picks. Of course, he's that sniper, and then once people get close, he can just go into his Jackie form easily with a click of a button with his reworked gadget. So for that reason, he's always going to be A tier. Next up in the A tier, we still have Piper. So she's not being used as much, nowhere near as much as when she was meta a few months ago, but with the hypercharge, it means she's still pretty good. In Bounty and Knockout, she's still alright, and longer range maps, she can be pretty good. But as time goes on, she's going to keep dropping. So in the A tier, we have Max. So Max's hypercharge is definitely carrying her at the moment. She's starting again to get power crept as well by other brawlers, but still the hypercharge brawler, especially in pro play, you can make so many amazing plays in Brawl, Gem Grab, and especially to counter snipers on Bounty. So she's pretty good still. Next up in the A tier, we have Lily. So I know everyone was asking where she's at. I think there's just too many better assassins right now. She can't really deal with the damage output that she used to, especially with the damage nerf a couple of months ago, but still she has a broken gadget, and she's an insane late pick, especially in draft. And still, against squishy brawlers, she'll just completely delete. But I will say the gadget is carrying her right now, so if you will see a gadget nerf, she probably would be near the bottom of the meta. So in the A tier, we have Kit. So Kit received a nerf to the cheeseburger gadget, and I don't think that was really the problem with Kit. The problem was the amount of healing that Kit provides on top of a tank, because the tankier the brawler, the more heals you just provide, because that's just how Kit works, which is just insane. You pair Kit with any of the meta tanks right now, Daryl, Frank, we have Mortis now, Buster. There's just so much cheesiness in Knockout and Bounty. Kit's just always going to remain meta. There's just not enough to counter Kit right now. Next up in the A tier, we have Gus. So a bold prediction, and I think Gus is easily minimum B tier in the meta. The damage buff was insane. I think it's 12% damage buff paired with the Cookie Popper 12% buff as well. It makes Gus a big threat. So Gus has gone from being like a good support brawler or a good brawler to finish off kills in the past with the knockback with the Cookie Popper gadget to now being like a sniper counter because of the amount of HP he has. He's got a really easy to hit shot, and his super does have a knockback, so at least he can defend himself a little bit against aggro. I think people are sleeping on Gus, and I think he's easily around the A tier. Next up in the A tier, we have Rico. So since the introduction of the Hypercharge, he's just been played so much more. There's so many good Rico maps in a rotation right now, which is really helping him. He's got a busted gadget in the multiple launcher, which is just able to rip through tanks, whereas before, you could just pick Edgar or Mortis and run into him. Now, he counters his counters, so he's just a do-it-all brawler right now. Next up in the A tier, we have Buster. So he received a small nerf to his HP, which really did nothing to him. He keeps getting these small tweaks because I think in the past he was either really strong or way too weak, so I think that's the best way to go about it. But still, Buster's still really good, especially in the right hands. His super is the main problem though. It counters pretty much everything. You automatically charge it. He's got a busted gadget. Any grassy map, you can make Buster work, so he's going to remain in the A tier forever. So in the A tier, we have Berry. So he received a small nerf to his healing trait, meaning that he just gets less supers from healing up his teammates or himself. So he's dropped down a little bit, but he still gets a lot of supers. He still gets so much value just out of his main attack, and he can be so dangerous when paired with any type of tank. You can get so much value out of Berry still. So in the A tier, we have Angelo. So another sniper that's starting to drop down a little bit. I will say Angelo's forever still going to be good though, because his damage is still insane. He's still got that very fast movement speed, and there's still always going to be those water maps in the game like Canal Grande, where he's going to be the golden S tier pick on. So I think he's pretty versatile and still near the top of the meta. Next up in the A tier, we have Brawlers. So another brawler where the map pool is just making this brawler so good. He actually didn't receive a nerf, whereas Berry did, which I'm a little bit confused about, but at the same time, maybe because people are just still underrating Barley. He's got a really good hypercharge. Just take a while to get, but it's really good. He's got 2 good gadgets, 2 good star powers, and he counters so much in ranked. He's my go-to brawler. He's my GOAT. Barley's still meta. Next up in the A tier, we have Byron. So still, he's not really received any nerfs. He is getting countered a little bit harder in this meta with like Daryl and Mortis, but still it's Byron. He's able to cycle through super so quickly. He still heals so much, deals damage so much. He can counter cheesy archetypes with his melee star power. There's just so much versatility with this brawler. He's so good. Next up in the A tier, we have Chester. So Chester, since the rework, has been so good in pro play. He's been used all the time, whether it be Brawl, Gem Grab, Hot Zone, and he's just so good as well because he's an RNG brawler. People just don't know what super you've got. If you've got the Dynamite super, it's game changing. If you've got the Stun super, you just hyper counter those assassins, and yeah, if you get close to Chester, you're just dead. His damage potential is insane. Next up in the A tier, we have Mortis. So Mortis is that brawler where people have been underrating and just saying that I'm a little bit deluded putting him in top 10, but trust me, Mortis is actually really good in the meta. With his hypercharge, you can just get infinite team wipes, and I know Mortis as a standalone brawler isn't that good. He does get countered by a lot. Still late pick in the draft, he's a free option, and it's the fact that he's actually good into tanks now because his hypercharge just rips through them. He can deal 9k damage with 2 supers, and all you got to do with the hypercharge is just line up 2 people, you get it back straight away. You can chain 3-4 bats in the space of seconds. So yeah, I think he's very good right now. So in the A tier, we have Meg. So she received a big damage nerf. I thought it was going to make a drop off to maybe like the B tier, but I still think once you get in Meg's range, you're pretty much done. She can be countered by simply outranging her, but still, she's got 8k HP, and she can work her way towards you easily. And you got to remember as well, because of the projectile buff, it's made her supercharge rate just go through the roof as well. She's a really hard brawler to kill, and especially with the star power that knocks people back and deals insane damage, it's really hard to kill Meg. So in the A tier, we have Larry and Laurie. So the twins are dominating in pro play. They're so versatile. As throwers, they're good in knockout and bounty because they've got the range, and then of course they're good in Brawl and Gem Grab, where, you know, shorter range throwers like Barley and Berry will dominate, whilst Larry and Laurie, they can do it all, and they can also do it all the fact that they can counter tanks as well. If you've got a tank, you can just switch over to the reload star power, and you're going to get infinite ammo from that. So for that reason, I think they're still so consistent, and they're easily A tier. Next up in the A tier, we have Frank. So he received some small nerfs to his HP, his gadget, and some other star power as well. And I don't think that really affected Frank too much. I will say just because of the meta around him, he's getting countered a little bit more, but still, he's like a top 5 brawler in the game near enough. He's still really broken once you get to low HP. You can just delete people. His hype charge just cycles so fast, And even if you don't see Frank in the draft, best believe that the draft is around trying to counter him, because if you don't have a counter, you're screwed. He'll just dominate. And lastly, in the A tier, we have Surge. So I'm not too sure where he fares in the top 10, but I just know he's in and around the top 10 because of that hypercharge. He was still pretty strong anyways on any grassy map. You can charge through supers, and the hypercharge allows him to be really good against snipers if you can get that correct timing with the hypercharge super. I will say it's a little bit awkward sometimes to use the hypercharge super. It's not as good as people think, but still, just having that stat boost and having the hypercharge itself has elevated him to a new level. So now we're going to be moving on to the S tier brawlers, starting off with a quick prediction in Kenji. I've tried him out a few times, and I think his star power, and especially his gadget, the healing gadget, is pretty broken. So if I was to have to anticipate, I think Kenji could be towards the S tier. But let's go on to Clancy to begin with. Clancy received 3 nerfs to his supercharge rate, his damage, and something else, and that's not really impacted him too much. He still gets through to his 3rd level so easily. His super still rips through people, and he still has no way to, I don't know, for example, there's brawlers like Surge, where if he dies, he loses his levels. Clancy, if he dies, he keeps his levels. So I think until they fix something about that, he's always going to be really good, because level 3 Clancy is the best brawler in the game. So now moving into the 3rd best brawler in the meta right now, we still have Gale. And boy, Gale, he's just so annoying right now. He's been meta for months now. He's just so frustrating, because Gale already is just such a hyper aggressive counter to assassins and tanks. They can't do anything, but then it becomes a problem when Gale starts to counter other brawlers, because of his super. It's so easy to hit. His main attack is so easy to hit. His hypercharge is busted. His super damage was fixed with the bugs, but still it was then buffed, which is just too much right now. There's just so many things in combination with Gale makes him way too strong. He's just countering everything. Gale is just too good. So now moving into the 2nd best brawler in the game right now, I went with Daryl. So it's been confirmed. I've been watching some scrims, and I think Daryl has just been used so much. If he's not used, he's banned. As a late pick option, he's really good in draft, and I've just seen him used a lot in ladder. And if he's not being used in ladder, best believe you're having to use tank counters like Gale, Clancy, because Daryl will just run all over you. The addition of 2 supers, the reason why it's so good is because you just have to charge 1 super and you get 2, and that's with a lot of shield, and that's with knockbacks and just everything else. You can make so many good plays. I will say he's not toxic broken or anything. He's just very good in the meta in the right hands, because his kit overall is still a little bit underwhelming with his star powers and gadgets, but still I think the rework has really helped him, and I think easily he's S tier. Now we're going to be moving on to the best brawler in the game. Last but not least, we have Mo, and boy, is he busted, okay? I was going to say that I don't think there's any broken brawler in the meta, but I think Mo is pretty broken. The more I face off against him, he's so frustrating. He's so hard to predict. It's the fact that his main attack will sometimes just deal 6k damage, then 1k damage, then 4k damage, but he has really consistent damage output, and I actually think it's his wall peeking capabilities as well, which is so underrated. You can just run up to people and just spam the attack and just deal insane damage whilst they're sat behind a wall, which is pretty much unheard of in Brawl Stars. There's not many brawlers that can do that, except for throwers, of course. And then, of course, this guy is super that he's literally invincible in, and then when he pops out, a knockback, and then he's got a really fast drill where will just rip through people, and then you can go back into your small form and get literally your ammo back, which is another busted thing about him. I don't know, his DPS potential in his normal form is insane. I just don't know how you actually counter this brawler. He's just horrible to face off against, and everybody's going to get their hands on him pretty soon. And I'm scared, because he's very strong in his current form. He definitely needs a couple of nerfs. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's video, guys. Take a look at the tier list, screenshot it. If you share it anywhere, make sure to share this video, of course. And of course, this is only a week's worth of data. We haven't really got much pro tournaments to really take a look at where we can really get a solid tier list. But I think it's pretty decent. I think the main takeaway from this tier list is that there's not many insane brawlers in previous metas. Nothing's really toxic except for Mo. But if you're playing ranked, then you kind of escape the Mo kind of apocalypse right now. But yeah, that's going to be it for today's video, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to comment and subscribe. I'll see you guys next time.